All right, you may be. We are in Joshua chapter 2, page 170 and 171 on your in the Bibles in the pews. If you're on a device, we are reading from the New International Version, the translation that we use here currently. We have been, if you're new to us this morning and we're not here last week, we started a series of messages called Mission Possible based on the book of Joshua. And today we are in Joshua 2. And as you read along with me, you can just listen as I read. This is an entire chapter, and we're not going to actually read the whole thing, but you'll get the context as we get moving. Joshua chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, Then Joshua the son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I didn't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had actually taken them up to the roof and hid them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. And will you bow with me for a quick word of prayer? God, thanks again for stories like this in the book of Joshua. Father, thank you for caring enough to use us, the most unlikely of people. And as we look at this story this morning, may it motivate us to understand what exactly that means and how you can use us to make a difference in this world. And we'll thank you for it in Christ's name. Amen. There's a pastor by the name of Willie Lyle. You may not know his name, but you may have heard the story. The story has sort of morphed in internet lore, if you will. But this is the true story of a new pastor that came to a church in Clarksville, Tennessee. His name is Willie Lyle, and Willie had decided that he needed to do something to sort of shake things up. So what he did is he went on the streets of Clarksville and lived as a homeless person for a week. He had been actually assigned to this new church. And so Willie decided to see really what did the homeless folks go through. So he literally had no contact with family, no money, no anything. He lived among the homeless people. The final day on a Sunday, which was to be his first day as the pastor of the church, he laid out on the church property after a week with no shower. And he laid out there, unshaven, hair a mess, underneath one of the trees. People came by. There was about 200 to 300 people that were at the church. About 20, as it were, came by and offered him something, or maybe said, do you want to come in, the AC? But that was about it. They just kind of left him be. He was on the church property. You can actually see this on the internet when he walks in for his sermon that day. Because he walked in as a guy who had been laying out underneath the tree. When he walked in, people were like, what? And he walks in with a Bible in his hands, and he goes up on the platform and he begins to tell the people the story of how he had lived among the homeless. And as he starts, suddenly his daughter-in-law comes up and starts shaving him and cleaning up his hair and doing all of these kinds of things. And he gets up and he continues to give the message. His point was that he wanted to start off by making the church realize that God reaches the most unlikely people. And that often we don't realize that it is us, or it could be us, that would be those unlikely people. You've probably felt like that before. Unlikely, maybe even, let's use a different term. Let's use the term outsider. You ever felt like an outsider? We probably all have at some point in our lives. You think about the reasons why people look at us as outsiders. You know, first of all, one of the things they'll do is often because of our genealogy. They look at where we came from. They look at it's sort of, well, I know who your dad was, or I know who your mom was, or I know who your grandmother was, and I know where you came from, and I know what your people were like. And so they judge us and kind of exclude us because of where we came from, because of the family we came from, because of the place that we came from. When you think about that definition of an outsider, even an outcast. An outcast is another good term. An outcast is a person that has been rejected by society or by a social group. So sometimes we're rejected because of our genealogy. Other times, I bet you've been rejected because of your ideology. I want you to think about that for a moment. Just by the way, in this church here right now, hang on to your hat, but you're going to find out that people have different political ideologies than you have. One of the funniest things that I saw this week that I posted on Facebook, I love the Babylon Bee. It's a very sarcastic sort of thing, and it showed a picture of a guy with a hat. Now they pick on both sides. They'll pick on Republicans and they pick on Democrats. It just happened to have been the Republicans' chance that day. And so it said, it was something to the effect of missionary to Africa converts whole village to Republicans. Now, it had Make America Great hat again. And the sarcasm was that they were more concerned about political ideology than they were reaching people for Jesus. Because Jesus didn't care about people's political ideology. But I bet you've been judged by it. I bet political ideology, I bet just the way you think about certain things. Sometimes we have different ideologies from generations. My generation picks at the millennials. The problem is we raised them. Baby boomers used to, they used to talk about, different generations too. It's always, well, this next generation coming up. Yeah, but you were our parents. We're judged on our ideology. We're also judged on our biography, by what we've done, by our past. And often people will exclude, will put us on the outside because of things that we've done before, because they know we're going to do it again, because all of these different things were kind of put on the outside. I guarantee you, at some point in your life, you have felt like an outsider or even an outcast. The interesting thing is that God is the one that goes after the outcast, and that's why I love this story this morning. It's one of my favorite in the Bible. See, last week we talked about Joshua, and we saw how Joshua had been the guy that God had prepared all the way through with Moses. He was Moses' assistant, and we saw Joshua come up through the ranks, and we saw that Joshua had been near Mount Sinai with Moses, and we saw how Joshua had wandered with the Israelites for 40 years, and then we saw how Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land, but Joshua and Caleb and their families were, and God tapped Joshua and said, you're the guy that's going to take this over. You're the guy that's going to lead him in. But we saw how even Moses had appointed him for that reason. So we saw that God had been preparing him. Today, it's different. Today we see a whole new thing. So you see what happens in this story is that Joshua pulls the spies, and he says, remember, they're founding a nation, and he says, I need you to go into Jericho, and I want you to find out what goes on. Now, what he didn't tell them probably was what they needed to do and where they needed to stay. Because if you saw the story, the spies go in, and they head straight for a prostitute's house. You can't make this stuff up. If I was writing a holy book, I wouldn't include this story. I mean, we talk about abstain from all appearance of evil, all this kind of stuff. Nope, right in there. Now, there's a couple of things that are interesting about Rahab the prostitute. She's been called all kinds of different names, trust me. But Rahab, who was the prostitute, was also not only a prostitute, but was likely, according to historical documents and other things, the way things happened in that day, may have also been an innkeeper. Rather convenient. The spies likely thought, it it's not going to be considered weird if somebody sees two guys heading to her house. It's not going to matter. So they decided to go there. Now, here's the other thing that's interesting. Often, just like you know how you'll have cops today that will have informants on the street? Often, the prostitutes also doubled as informants. So they were taking a really big risk also in going there. It's sort of a mixture of things. And so they go to Rahab's house. And Rahab, of course, brings them in. And so she, suddenly though, word got out really, really fast. And you saw what happened. Word gets out fast. King sends messengers, and she sees that King's messengers are here. She takes these two spies. She puts them upstairs. She hides them. And then, what does she do? Probably what she was used to doing. Automatic, she lies. Rahab, we saw two guys that showed up here. Could you send them out? So, yeah, they came by. They dropped by. They were here for a little bit, but they're gone. You maybe find them if you go out this way. And so we're going to pick up the story right there, because she's told them, go out. She sees all the pursuers go out, and the city gates are shut. And so now we pick up the story where the prostitute goes up to talk to the two men. Before the spies lay down for the night, verse 8, she went up on the roof and said to them, now listen to this. I know that the Lord has given you this land. I know that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country, now listen to this, are melting in fear because of you. In other words, everybody in my town is paranoid. We're scared to death. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, who you completely destroyed. Now, you see this? She's like, listen, now, we have to talk. We have to talk, because I know why you're here. And you're not here to see me. You're here to spy this thing out, which means you're coming for us next. And let me tell you, I know all about you guys. I know that nobody's been able to stand up against you. I know that God has given you this land. I've heard about all of this. And then she said, we've melted in fear. Verse 11, we heard it in our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed. Now listen to this, because of you. Now here it is. Watch this. For the Lord your God is God in heaven and on the earth below. Ooh, wait a minute. That's pretty interesting. This from the lips, the mouth of a prostitute. She goes, look, we're scared, but she says, let me tell you what I know. I know that the God that you worship, not the God of the Canaanites that all of my folks worship, but I know that the God you worship, that he's real. I know what he's done. I know and I believe what he's done. So I know this is going to happen. And so because of this, and so that I know I can trust you, but it wouldn't be unreasonable for a prostitute to not trust the men, would it? Verse 12. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family. Why? Because I've shown kindness to you. And we suddenly got a quid pro quo going on. She says, listen, I know what's going to happen. I believe that God has given you the land. I believe in him. I believe he's the real God. But listen, so I know destruction's coming. I know you're going to take this place over. So here's what I want you to swear to me as an oath. I want you to make a promise, but then I want you to make it, and you're going to have to swear it to me. Because honestly, I don't trust you. I've shown kindness to you. Now I want you to return the favor. And she said this, give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and my mother and my brothers and my sister and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Wow. I need you to swear me an oath that because I've saved you, you're going to save me and my family when this attack on our city Jericho comes down. Notice what they said, verse 14. our lives for your lives. The men assured her, if you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully, and the Lord gives us the land. Now notice what she does. You know, it's interesting because you have to put yourself there, and I don't want to go too far with this, but notice what, she let them down by a rope through the window. Now, do you think everybody just had ropes in that day to get down out of the window? No, but because of what she did for a living, I'm sure there's people that needed to make a quick escape. So she lets them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. So then she goes on and she tells them what they need to do. Now watch this. Watch what they say to her. Now the men had said this to her. Remember, she said, I want an oath. I need you to make me a promise. I need to know that you're going to save my family and me. So then they said this oath that you made us swear will not be binding on you unless, I love this, we're going to save you, but this is not going to be bound unless you take some actions. This is not just you ask us for this and we're going to give it to you. You need to do something. And so then notice what they said. When we enter the land, you have tied this, I love this scarlet cord, this red cord. Now watch this. In the window through which you let us down. The window that you used to save us is going to be the place that you're going to hang this scarlet rope in that very window. And unless you have brought your father and your mother and your brothers and all your family into your house, if any of them go outside your house to the street, their blood will be on their own heads, will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on your head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell them what we are doing, we will be released from the oath that you made us swear. Agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. Now this is interesting. They said, okay, we'll do this. No problem. But here's what you need to do. Tie the rope. When we leave, tie the rope, because this thing's coming. Then I want you to bring all of your family into your house. And then listen, you have got to keep your mouth shut. Why? Because the prostitutes were normally informants. They were usually playing all sides against the middle just to be able to get what they needed to do, that needed to have to survive. So it was certainly true that this is where she was at in life. And now she says, listen, I'll do this. So she follows us, and we're going to look at this later when we go look at this passage much later. When they come in and they actually attack, we'll see what happens. But suffice it to say, she says, I agree to all of this. I'm going to do it. Now notice what happens. She sends them away. They departed, and then it talks about how they got along and the time that they were away. Then I want you to see what happens. I love this, because we're going to tie it back around again. Verse 24, they come back to Joshua. Remember, Joshua said, I want you to go out and check it out. Remember what Rahab said to them? Listen, our hearts are melting. We're melting. We're so scared. So they come to Joshua and he goes, okay guys, give me the report. And they said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. Watch this. All the people are what? Melting in fear because of us. Wow. God used the most unlikely person to do the most unbelievable thing. A prostitute. Now, what's interesting about Rahab is that you wonder, how did all this end? How does this end for Rahab? And I'm going to give a spoiler for a few weeks. She does get saved. They save her just as they say they're going to. But you see, there's something interesting that happens that we really wind up, really becomes our lesson through this whole thing. Winds up being our lesson. And I want you to think about it for a minute. God gives the outcast a new outlook. God gives the outcast a new outlook. Let me say that again. It's the one place you have a fill in the blank. God gives the outcast a new outlook. Because Because what he said, they gave her a chance, and she said, okay, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then what happens later is they pull her out, and they put her outside the camp of Israel, so that even if the people from Jericho come in to attack their camp, that her and her family are going to be saved. They saved her. But let me tell you what the rest of the story, and the rest of the story is what's so interesting to me. Rahab, the prostitute, is mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. Now, there's some interesting ones. There's, of course, one in James where we see her talked about. But I think one of the most interesting ones is found in the book of Matthew. Some of you already know this, but remember we talked about genealogy and judging people based on their genealogy? Who was in their family? Who was in their family tree? In Matthew chapter 1, Matthew is recording the earthly genealogy of Jesus. And we get down to verse 4, and he says this: Ram, the father of Abinadab, Abinadab, the father of Nahshon. He's tracing this. Nahshon, the father of Salmon, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was, are you ready? Rahab. Rahab life was transformed so much that when they brought her out, they then brought her in to their community because she believed in Jehovah God. And that outlook, that new outlook, gave her an entirely different outcome in her life. Because you can fill it in differently too, and say differently that God gives the outcast also a new outcome. That is the story that is going on here in the book of Ruth. Now, let me just say this to you. Let me back up again to what we said at the beginning. I don't know whether you've been there, you felt like that you're an outcast. You felt like that you're rejected, that you're marginalized, that nothing can ever happen good for you. Let me tell you, the good news of the gospel is that God takes the person who's the outcast, the person who's the outsider, and he gives them a new outlook. And once he gives you that new outlook, that whole outcome can change. But there's something else. Maybe you don't feel like an outsider. Maybe you're part of the faith community and you feel like, but I don't feel like an outsider. But guess what? Outsiders are going to come in. You're going to have an opportunity to minister to outsiders. And you know what? We don't want to be like that church and judge the person based on how they look, based on where they've come from, based on how they vote, based on what they look like, based on how they wear their hair, based on how they're dressed, based on their age, based on whatever. You can fill in the blank. Because here's the thing. Those are the unlikely people that God uses to change everything. Do you realize that was the entire ministry of Jesus? We make it think it's to the religious people. I mean, and you know what? If we've done that as a church, if we've let people think that's who Jesus is, then we are dead wrong. But why do you think there were stories of like the prodigal son? I love the story. I don't know that the story is so much about the son that ran away and that came back as it is the son who was always there. You ever thought about that? We never look at the prodigal son story from the son who was always there, because he was the one that was whining and moaning, not because his brother came back, but I've been here. I've been faithful. I do all of this stuff for you. I take care of you. I'm always here. And now you're making a big deal about him. And the father said, yes. The answer is yes, because your brother was lost and now he's found. Your brother was an outsider and now he's back. So yes, we're making a big deal about it. Sometimes we miss that. See, here's the thing. If you feel like an outsider, God wants to use you to not only give you a different outlook and not only give you a different outcome in your life, but really to change the outcome of others. That is what's so powerful. that he can use you to change others. Look at how he used the spies. And let me tell you what, if you've ever been worried about your ideology, you've ever been worried about your genealogy, you've ever been worried about your biography, he'll meet you right where you are. And he's not going to leave you there. He'll take you out. He'll bring you in. He'll change your outlook, which will change your outcome. And when that happens, everything changes. There was an interesting thing that happened more than a few years ago now. Apple had this campaign called Think Different. It was interesting because Steve Jobs was alive at the time, and Jobs, of course, as always, he took credit for liking the campaign because it changed everything. But the story is, from the people that were in the room, that Jobs did not like this campaign at first. But it's now, the verbiage of it has become famous. Listen to it. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see geniuses. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Well, it's interesting and that's inspiring, but I had to take it and rewrite it, because I think the people that change the world don't change them with computers. They're changed with the gospel. So here's how I kind of rewrote it. So here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who others see differently. They don't always follow the rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because God changes and uses them. And he uses them to bring them to himself. And while some may see them as a misfit, God sees them as a miracle. Because the people who are the outcast today, God uses to change the world tomorrow. In God's kingdom, there's no such thing as a misfit. Because he takes the misfits and he turns their entire life into a miracle. He takes the outcast and changes their outcome. Possibly changes the world. So if you feel like an outcast, don't. Because you're not. People are always going to be there to make you feel different. They're always going to be there that are going to reject you based on some of those things that we talked about. When you do, remember that God used a prostitute to change the destiny of the nation of Israel. And he not only used her to change the destiny of Israel and to shape their mission and responsible for giving them victory, but God used the misfit in the line of the Messiah. I don't think anybody would question his family tree. Don't worry about yours. God will take you and change your outlook and ultimately change your outcome. Let's pray.